This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Swiss Family Robinson by Johann David Wyss. Chapter 47. We soon arrived at Family Bridge, where I had some hopes of meeting Francis, and perhaps his mother, who was beginning to walk very well. But I was disappointed. They were not there. Yet I was not uneasy, for they were neither certain of the hour of our return, nor of the way we might take. I expected, however, to find them in the colonnade. They were not there. I hastily entered the house. I called aloud, "Elizabeth! Francis! Where are you?" No one answered. A mortal terror seized me, and for a moment I could not move. "They will be in the grotto," said Ernest. "Or in the garden," said Fritz. "Perhaps on the shore," cried Jack. "My mother likes to watch the waves, and Francis may be gathering shells." These were possibilities. My sons flew in all directions to search of their mother and brother. I found it impossible to move, and was obliged to sit down. I trembled, and my heart beat till I could scarcely breathe. I did not venture to dwell on the extent of my fears, or rather, I had no distinct notion of them. I tried to recover myself. I murmured, "Yes, at the grotto or the garden. They will return directly." Still I could not compose myself. I was overwhelmed with a sad presentiment of the misfortune which impended over me. It was but too soon realized. My sons returned in fear and consternation. They had no occasion to tell me the result of their search. I saw it at once, and sinking down motionless, I cried, "Alas! They are not there!" Jack returned the last, and in the most frightful state. He had been at the seashore, and throwing himself into my arms, he sobbed out, "The savages have been here, and carried away my mother and Francis. Perhaps they have devoured them. I have seen the marks of their horrible feet on the sands, and the print of dear Francis's boots." This account at once recalled me to strength and action. "Come, my children, let us fly to save them. God will pity our sorrow and assist us. He will restore them. Come, come!" They were ready in a moment. But a distracting thought seized me. Had they carried off the pinnace? If so, every hope was gone. Jack, in his distress, had never thought of remarking this, but the instant I named it, Fritz and he ran to ascertain the important circumstance, Ernest, in the meantime, supporting me and endeavouring to calm me. "Perhaps," said he, "they are still in the island. Perhaps they may have fled to hide themselves in some wood or amongst the reeds. Even if the pinnace be left, it would be prudent to search the island from end to end before we leave it. Trust Fritz and me, we will do this, and even if we find them in the hands of the enemy, we will recover them. Whilst we are off on this expedition, you can be preparing for our voyage, and we will search the world from one end to the other, every country and every sea, but we will find them, and we shall succeed. Let us put our whole trust in God. He is our Father. He will not try us beyond our strength." I embraced my child, and a flood of tears relieved my overcharged heart. My eyes and hands were raised to heaven. My silent prayers winged their flight to the Almighty, to Him who tries us and consoles us. A ray of hope seemed to visit my mind, when I heard my boys cry out as they approached, "The pinnace is here! They have not carried that away!" I fervently thanked God. It was a kind of miracle, for this pretty vessel was more tempting than the canoe. Perhaps, as it was hidden in a little creek between the rocks, it had escaped their observation. Perhaps they might not know how to manage it, or they might not be numerous enough. No matter, it was there, and might be the means of our recovering the beloved objects these barbarians had torn from us. How gracious is God to give us hope to sustain us in our afflictions! Without hope we could not live. It restores and revives us, and even if never realized below, accompanies us to the end of our life, and beyond the grave. I imparted to my eldest son the idea of his brother, that they might be concealed in some part of the island, but I dared not rely on this sweet hope. Finally, as we ought not to run the risk of abandoning them, if they were still here, and perhaps in the power of the savages, I consented that my 2 eldest sons should go to ascertain the fact. Besides, however impatient I was, I felt that a voyage such as we were undertaking into unknown seas might be of long duration, and it was necessary to make some preparations. I must think on food, water, arms, and many other things. There are situations in life which seize the heart and soul, rendering us insensible to the wants of the body. This we now experienced. We had just come from a painful journey, on foot, of 24 hours, during which we had had little rest and no sleep. Since morning we had eaten nothing but some morsels of the breadfruit. It was natural that we should be overcome with fatigue and hunger. But we none of us had even thought of our own state. We were supported, if I may use the expression, by our despair. At the moment that my sons were going to set out, the remembrance of their need of refreshment suddenly occurred to me, and I besought them to rest a little and take something, but they were too much agitated to consent. I gave Fritz a bottle of canary, and some slices of roast mutton I met with, which he put in his pocket. They had each a loaded musket, and they set out, taking the road along the rocks, where the most hidden retreats and most impenetrable woods lay. They promised me to fire off their pieces frequently to let their mother know that they were there, if she was hidden among the rocks. They took also one of the dogs. Flora we could not find, which made us conclude she had followed her mistress, to whom she was much attached. As soon as my eldest sons had left us, I made Jack conduct me to the shore where he had seen the footmarks, that I might examine them, to judge of their number and direction. I found many very distinct, but so mingled I could come to no positive conclusion. Some were near the sea, with the foot pointing to the shore, and amongst these Jack thought he could distinguish the boot mark of Francis. My wife wore very light boots also, which I had made for her. They rendered stockings unnecessary, and strengthened her ankles. I could not find the trace of these, but I soon discovered that my poor Elizabeth had been here, from a piece torn from an apron she wore, made of her own cotton and dyed red. I had now not the least doubt that she was in the canoe with her son. It was a sort of consolation to think they were together, but how many mortal fears accompanied this consolation! Oh, was I ever to see again these objects of my tenderest affection? Certain now that they were not in the island, I was impatient for the return of my sons, and I made every preparation for our departure. The first thing I thought of was the wrecked chest, which would furnish me with means to conciliate the savages, and to ransom my loved ones. I added to it everything likely to tempt them, utensils, stuffs, trinkets. I even took with me gold and silver coin, which was thrown on one side as useless, but might be of service to us on this occasion. I wished my riches were 3 times as much as they were, that I might give all in exchange for the life and liberty of my wife and son. I then turned my thoughts on those remaining to me. I took, in bags and gourds, all that we had left of cassava bread, manioc roots, and potatoes, a barrel of salt fish, 2 bottles of rum, and several jars of fresh water. Jack wept as he filled them at his fountain, which he perhaps might never see again, any more than his dear Valiant, whom I set at liberty, as well as the cow, ass, buffalo, and the beautiful onagra. These docile animals were accustomed to us and our attentions, and they remained in their places, surprised that they were neither harnessed nor mounted. We opened the poultry yard and pigeon cote. The flamingo would not leave us. It went and came with us from the house to the pinnace. We took also oil, candles, fuel, and a large iron pot to cook our provisions in. For our defence I took 2 more guns, and a small barrel of powder, all we had left. I added besides some changes of linen, not forgetting some for my dear wife, which I hoped might be needed. The time fled rapidly while we were thus employed. Night came on, and my sons returned not. My grief was inconceivable. The island was so large and woody that they might have lost themselves, or that savages might have returned and encountered them. After 20 hours of frightful terror, I heard the report of a gun. Alas, only 1 report! It was the signal agreed on if they returned alone, 2 if they brought their mother, 3 if Francis also accompanied them. But I expected they would return alone, and I was still grateful. I ran to meet them. They were overcome with fatigue and vexation. They begged to set out immediately, not to lose one precious moment. They were now sure the island did not contain those they lamented, and they hoped I would not return without discovering them, for what would the island be to us without our loved ones? Fritz, at that moment, saw his dear Lightfoot capering round him, and could not help sighing as he caressed him and took leave of him. "May I find thee here," said he, "where I leave thee in such sorrow, and I will bring back thy young master," added he, turning to the bull, who was also approaching him. He then begged me again to set out, as the moon was just rising in all her majesty. "The Queen of Night," said Ernest, "will guide us to the Queen of our island, who is perhaps now looking up to her and calling on us to help her." "Most assuredly," said I, "she is thinking on us. But it is on God she is calling for help. Let us join her in prayer, my dear children, for herself and our dear Francis." They fell on their knees with me, and I uttered the most fervent and earnest prayer that ever human heart poured forth, and I rose with confidence that our prayers were heard. I proceeded with new courage to the creek that contained our pinnace, where Jack arranged all we had brought. We rowed out of the creek, and when we were in the bay, we held a council to consider on which side we were to commence our search. I thought of returning to the great bay, from whence our canoe had been taken. My sons, on the contrary, thought that these islanders, content with their acquisition, had been returning homewards, coasting along the island, when an unhappy chance had led their mother and brother to the shore, where the savages had seen them and carried them off. At the most, they could be but a day before us, but that was long enough to fill us with dreadful anticipations. I yielded to the opinion of my sons, which had a great deal of reason on its side. Besides, the wind was favorable in that direction, and abandoning ourselves in full confidence to Almighty God, we spread our sails, and were soon in the open sea. End of chapter.